When Diana paused and gave him a long look, John responded with a familiar phrase, "I understand." He'd noticed lately how often those words came out of his mouth, and he was getting sick of hearing them, even from himself. He found himself wondering how things between him and Diana had unraveled like this. They'd been married for more than 22 years, had raised two wonderful kids who were now both in college, and lived in a beautiful old house that Diana had inherited from her grandmother. Together, they had poured their hearts into that home, transforming it with modern updates. They'd added a pool and built a detached garage, turning the once cozy house into an open-concept space with a stunningly renovated kitchen. John felt immense pride in that house. He thought it could easily hold its own against anything featured on TV renovation shows. On top of that, they had a charming beach house in Hatteras, North Carolina. Unlike their main home, John had kept the beach house just as it was when he was a kid, simple and steeped in nostalgia. That place was sacred to him, a canvas of priceless family memories. John Simon Thomas was now the senior vice president at Central Logistics, finally enjoying the rewards of decades of hard work. Diana Anderson Thomas had also built an impressive career of her own. She was a senior client manager at Richards & Sons, a respected securities firm where she'd worked for 20 years. By all outward appearances, they had the dream life. A beautiful home, nearly perfect kids, thriving careers, and what should have been a solid marriage. But somehow he kept finding himself repeating those words. "I understand." The truth was, he didn't understand at all. Diana broke the silence again. "Do you understand what I'm trying to say?" she asked, searching his face. "I understand," he replied once more, though he silently hoped she hadn't noticed the marks he'd been tallying on the paper in front of him. He glanced down 32 ticks over the last 2 days. He told her "I understand" 32 times. Enough was enough. "So, we're finally in agreement?" Diana asked. "I'm going to step outside our marriage, just once, to experience this." John shook his head firmly, cutting her off. Diana hesitated, but he met her gaze and said, "I will never cheat on you, and I will never agree to you cheating on me." "I've never cheated on you," Diana shot back defensively. John kept his voice calm but unrelenting. "I'm willing to forgive what you've done so far, but that's it, this stops now." Diana's defiant eyes met his. "I haven't cheated," she insisted. "Yes, you have," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "At least in my eyes. And if you're being honest with yourself, you know it too. You've had private lunches with him, more than once. He's shown up at your girls' nights and turned them into dates. You've texted him endlessly, especially on weekends." John paused, holding her gaze until she finally lowered her head. "He booked a suite at the Jefferson Hotel and reserved a table for their Sunday brunch," he continued. "His intentions couldn't be clearer. And that new dress buried deep in your closet? The one from Victoria's Secret? I'm guessing it wasn't meant for me." Diana stayed silent, but her eyes gave everything away. John took a steadying breath and said, "I'm going to make this simple, so there's no room for confusion. Here are your options. This Saturday morning, I'm heading to the beach house. I'll grab breakfast at Virginia's Diner and then make my way to the coast. I want you to come with me. We can spend the weekend talking, really talking, and figure out if we can save this marriage. Maybe you could return the lingerie you bought for him and pick out something for us instead." He paused again, searching her face for any sign of what she was feeling, but lately, it was as though he couldn't read her at all. A feeling that was still foreign and unsettling to him. "Your other option," he continued, "is to stick to your plans. Meet David Summers at the Jefferson Hotel. Enjoy your romantic dinner, dance at the club, and return to the hotel to finish what you started." He leaned forward. "Look at me." Slowly, she raised her head, her expression stricken. "You can go through with your plans. You don't need my permission," John said quietly. "But the second I leave for the beach without you, our marriage is over." Diana's eyes widened in shock. How did he know about their weekend plans? She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, John added, "In case you're wondering, I have friends where you work. You've got coworkers who care about you. And, Lastly, David Summers isn't as subtle as he thinks he is. David doesn't have any real friends, John said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. Diana froze as the weight of his words sank in. She hesitated, then decided to go on the offensive. "I've been a faithful wife and partner to you for 22 years, she declared, her tone defiant. John's eyes hardened. "No," he corrected quietly. "You were faithful for 21 years and 10 months. You've been cheating on me since your first lunch with David Summers." "I never cheated on you," Diana pleaded, her voice trembling. "You've already been intimate with him," John began, but Diana shot up from her seat, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I have never cheated on you," she shouted. John's sadness surprised her as he spoke again. "I've seen the betrayal in your eyes, Diana. The same eyes that used to stay locked on mine when we made love. Now they shut tight. Your face turns away from me in bed. How many times, Diana? How many times were you thinking of him while we were together?" John let out a bitter laugh. "We used to joke about fantasies, a threesome with someone else, either a man or a woman. Funny how life works. Huh? You've already made that fantasy real, except I wasn't invited. For months now, our bed hasn't felt like ours. It's been crowded with the ghost of someone else." Diana's face fell as she realized the conversation wasn't going in the direction she had expected. Desperate to regain control, she softened her tone. "John, we have a wonderful marriage. I treasure what we've built together. We've raised 2 incredible kids. We've both worked so hard and have successful careers. If we stay the course, we'll be able to retire early and really enjoy life together. I love you. I've always loved you. I'll give you the rest of my life. I just need one day for myself. One night with him." John's response came quick and sharp. Diana lowered her eyes, shaking her head before looking at him again. "I could have gone behind your back. I could have lied, but I didn't. I wanted to be honest with you. After all these years, I thought you'd understand." John's voice was steady but relentless. "I do understand, but you have lied. You have gone behind my back for months. You've gone on dates with him, pretending they were girls' nights. You've had intimate lunches where you held his hand and let him touch you, touching you in ways that should have been reserved for me. And the worst part? You let him into our bedroom in the most devastating way, by thinking of him while you were with me. You've flooded our life with hundreds of his messages. Let's not forget the sexting, Diana. I know everything." Her eyes widened, but John's gaze didn't waver. "It doesn't matter how I found out," he continued. "What matters is that you understand what I'm telling you. Do you?" Diana stared at him, but the woman he saw wasn't the same one he had known for over 2 decades. Her eyes, once familiar, now seemed like a stranger's. He let out a quiet sigh, realizing she didn't truly grasp the depth of what he was saying. John rose from his seat and left the room without another word. He walked to their bedroom, brushed his teeth, and lay down, though he knew sleep wouldn't come easily that night. Diana remained frozen in place for a few long minutes before she finally reached for her phone. She curled up on the couch and dialed her best friend, Janice. When Janice picked up, Diana's voice was quiet but urgent. "John knows everything. He knows about David and the plans for this weekend." There was a pause before Janice replied, "That's bad news. Please tell me you're canceling." Diana swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how I can. I promised David. And he spent so much money on this weekend." Janice's response was firm. "Diana, you made vows to John long before you made any promises to David. Or have you forgotten?" "I haven't. I was your bridesmaid, remember?" Janice's voice softened for a moment. "Summers can cancel everything. It won't cost him a thing that matters. And even if it did, that's no excuse to betray John." "I'm not cheating on John," Diana insisted weakly, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "You are," Janice said bluntly. "When I told you what George and I did, I made sure you understood that I'd never have done it without his blessing. And we chose the person together. It was someone we'd never have to see again. We handled it the right way, and even then, it caused problems we're still working through. You, on the other hand, are planning to sleep with a coworker and trying to justify it. Janice's voice softened into a plea. Please, Diana, forget this whole plan. Stop seeing David. Get on your knees if you have to and apologize to John. Diana's response was barely above a whisper. But I need this. I really need to experience being with another man. Just once more in my life. David's a good guy, and the women at work say he's amazing in bed. Janice let out a frustrated sigh. A good guy wouldn't sleep with a married woman, she said flatly. Think about what you're risking, Diana. You're about to throw everything away just to become another notch on his bedpost. Diana's voice grew defensive. I won't be just another notch. He's attentive to me. He makes me feel seen. Janice resisted the urge to scream. Don't you get it? That makes it even worse. I've met David, remember? It was at that girl's night. Sure, he's a nice-looking guy, but he's nothing compared to John. You see that, don't you? I understand, Diana murmured. Janice's voice softened again. Please, Diana, think long and hard about what you're doing. This choice won't just change your life. It'll impact everyone you love, for the rest of their lives. Diana's response was barely audible. I thought you of all people would understand. I really believed you would understand why I need to do this. Janice tried one more time, desperate to get through to her friend. Diana, the issue isn't that I don't understand. It's not that John doesn't understand. The problem isn't your kids, your parents, or your friends not understanding. The problem is that you don't understand. Janice's voice cracked. I'm begging you, don't do this. Diana's voice, in contrast, was calm and determined. John knows everything I've done up to now. He hasn't stopped me. He won't like it, but he'll let me do it. He'll understand how important this is to me. She paused, as though deciding the conversation was over. I need to get some sleep. When the call ended, Janice stared at her phone, shaken. She turned to George, her husband, her face full of worry. She didn't listen. She didn't understand a word I said. George's brow furrowed. I'm so sorry you told her about our experience. Janice looked down, a little ashamed. I know. We agreed to keep that between us. But I needed someone to talk to about our issues. I never thought it would give her ideas. George wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a comforting hug. It's okay. I'm not upset. Honestly, I've confided in John about our problems too. Janice looked up, startled. You told John? George nodded. Yeah, but it wasn't what you think. He didn't judge or tell me I'd screwed up. He just asked me questions, honest, thoughtful ones that made me reflect on us. When I was done answering, he said, You two got into this together. You made the choice together and it turned out to be a mistake. But you're both trying to fix it, and that's what matters. And he was right. It reminded me that we're in this together. Maybe that's why we're still married. Tears welled up in Janice's eyes. She spoke softly. Maybe that's the reason we're still married. And maybe we're the reason he might get divorced. George shook his head as he held her tighter. Don't do that. Don't blame yourself. John's right. If they can't work through this together, they don't stand a chance. Meanwhile, Diana had slipped into bed, feeling the silence in the room like a weight. John was still awake, facing away from her. They both shifted toward the far edges of the mattress, creating a chasm of space between them that felt immeasurable despite being only a couple of feet. The alarm clock's chime ended the restless night. They got up and moved through their morning routines without a single word exchanged. The weight of everything unsaid clung to the air. After Diana left for work, John took a deep breath and sat down, going over the list in his hands. He'd taken today and Monday off, giving himself time to sort things out. He moved through each room of their home, taking photos of every space and its contents. He meticulously cataloged what was in each room and made notes about the items he wanted to keep. When he was done, he downloaded all their wedding photos and family albums from the cloud and saved them onto a flash drive. Their wedding album lay on the coffee table, untouched. John couldn't bring himself to open it. The photos inside held moments of pure joy, but now, They felt like artifacts from a life slipping through his fingers. The apartments he had toured were nice enough, modern, clean, and functional. But he knew he would miss this house, the one that had been the backdrop to so many memories. No matter where he ended up, a piece of his heart would stay behind, bound to the walls of this home. Most of all, he knew he would miss her. Despite everything, he couldn't stop loving Diana or mourning the life they had built together here. With a steadying breath, John left to meet Sandra Lewis, the attorney who came highly recommended. Her settlement proposal was straightforward and practical. Diana would keep the house and her retirement plan. John would keep the beach house and his retirement plan. He'd pay off her car and clear the balance on their credit cards. A portion of their investment accounts would be allocated for college tuition, along with $10,000 for each child to start a charitable fund. The remaining funds would be split evenly between them. After scanning the proposal, John looked up and nodded without a word. Sandra adjusted her glasses and said, "We can file the papers Wednesday morning." John nodded again, stood up, shook her hand, and walked out of the office. Sandra watched him leave, her expression thoughtful. In all their interactions, John had barely spoken to her. Every bit of communication had been handled through email. His silence wasn't due to anger. She saw it for what it was: resignation. A quiet, aching kind of sadness. Sandra couldn't help but wonder, not for the first time, why she'd chosen family law. Cases like this chipped away at her. John headed straight to the bank. He opened a new account and transferred half of the funds from their joint account into it. He emailed the necessary paperwork to his company's HR department to update his direct deposit information. Later, he'd make sure all his payment accounts were linked to the new bank. Next, he visited their investment banker. The banker explained that their joint accounts and any transfers required both parties' signatures. John calmly informed him that his attorney, Sandra Lewis, would place a freeze on those accounts the day after Diana was served. The banker's concerned expression didn't go unnoticed by John. He could see it in the man's eyes, the mix of pity and awkward discomfort. It dawned on John that this was only the beginning. Soon, every acquaintance, neighbor, and coworker would wear that same sympathetic look. But the thought that nearly broke him was imagining the day he'd have to sit his kids down and tell them about the divorce. Meanwhile, Diana was doing her best to avoid David Summers at work. But lunchtime found them together at Maria's cafe, a cozy spot David liked to call their place. She barely spoke and pulled her hand away when he tried to hold it. "You've been quiet all day," David said with a charming smile. "I'm excited about this weekend. Check in at the hotels at 3 p.m. Do you think we could meet earlier? Maybe have a little fun before dinner?" Diana shook her head, her tone reserved. "I don't think so." Back at the office, she tried to focus on her work, but her mind was restless. Her eyes kept flitting around the room, watching shadows and movements. Paranoia whispered in her ear. Could one or more of her colleagues be keeping tabs on her for John? The thought gnawed at her until, after a couple of fruitless hours, she grabbed her things and left early. As she walked down the hallway, she smiled and nodded at two new interns. But as she passed, something caught her eye: the distinctive Central Logistics logo on one of their sweatshirts. She froze for a second before glancing back at them, suspicion twisting in her chest. At that moment, John had just finished the last task on his list. It was 2 p.m., and he realized he hadn't eaten all day. His stomach growled as a reminder, so he headed to Maria's cafe to grab a bite. The moment he walked in, Maria, the cafe's owner, greeted him warmly and pulled him into a hug. "John, it's so good to see you," she said with a smile. John hugged her back and asked, "How's your son doing?" Maria's eyes lit up. "He's doing great. He made the baseball team as a freshman. He's thrilled. James was such an amazing training partner for him last winter. Your son made all the difference." John smiled, but the warmth didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's wonderful to hear. James is excited that his roommate made the team with him," John replied with a faint smile. Maria pulled out a chair and sat down beside him. "They were here for lunch again today," she said softly. But things didn't seem too great in paradise. Diana looked nervous. And, of course, Summers didn't even notice. He's clueless. But he's definitely planning to sleep with her this weekend. John's shoulders slumped, and his voice was heavy. I know. Maria reached over and gave his arm a reassuring pat. Don't give up on her so quickly. She must be someone truly special if you've stayed married for so long. She'll realize her mistake. And I just hope it happens sooner rather than later. John's lips curved into a small, tired smile, the first one that day. Maryland crab cakes with broccoli? Maria smiled back. You got it. And how about a beer for a change? I'll surprise you with one of our light Alish. Meanwhile, Diana had arrived home early and began putting her backup plan into action. She decided to make John's favorite dinner and then try to talk to him again. She needed him to agree to her one-time date. If she couldn't get his approval, she hoped, at the very least, that he could learn to live with her choice. As the crab cakes baked, she went upstairs and changed into something flattering. She wanted to look her best for him. After dinner, she planned to meet Janice and her other friend, Lisa, for drinks to go over the big day one last time. Before leaving, Diana gathered the clothes and the Victoria's Secret bags from her closet and placed them carefully in the trunk of her car. She didn't want to humiliate either herself or John by letting him see them. John came home at his usual time and was surprised by the smell of dinner wafting from the kitchen. Diana met him in the living room with a soft smile and handed him a bottle of light beer. Take off your jacket and tie, she said gently. Dinner will be ready in a couple of minutes. John's heart twisted as he took in the sight of the table set with Maryland crab cakes and steamed broccoli, his favorite meal. But as grateful as he was, a strange thought hit him. He'd rather be sitting at Maria's cafe, away from the silence that filled this house. As they ate without speaking, Diana decided to try again to make him understand. John, I love you, she began quietly. And I pray that you'll understand why John cut her off, his voice neutral but sharp. I understand. He gave her a once-over. You look very nice today. Are you going somewhere? Diana hesitated. Yes, I'm meeting Janice and Lisa for drinks later. But I'm trying to tell you that I love you, and I'm hoping you'll. Yes, you're hoping I'll understand, John said coldly. He set down his fork, pushed his chair back, and stood. I really do understand. He took a step toward the living room and added bitterly, You're dressed up for him, aren't you? I guess you couldn't wait until tomorrow. When you see David Summers tonight, do me a favor. Tell him to drop dead. With that, he disappeared into the living room, and the sound of the TV filled the silence he'd left behind. Diana sat at the table, resting her head in her hands. For the first time, doubt began to creep in. Was this really worth it? Was she about to make the biggest mistake of her life? After a few moments, she stood up and cleared the table. No, she whispered to herself. I need to stay true to my feelings. She grabbed her phone and sent Janice a quick text. We can meet earlier. I'm leaving in 5 minutes. John heard the front door open and close. He took another sip of his beer, staring blankly at the TV. After 20 minutes, he realized he had no idea what channel he was watching. A crushing sadness settled on his chest, so heavy it felt hard to breathe. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. He tipped 2 pills into his hand and swallowed them with the last of his beer. For the first time in his life, John took a sleeping pill. He knew that without help, sleep would be impossible, and he needed his strength for Saturday. Diana was the first to arrive at the bar. She chose a table for 3 and sat down, tapping her fingers nervously on the surface. Around her, the bar was alive with movement. Men and women locked in flirtatious dances that felt more like acts of desperation than seduction. Is this what I'm chasing? She wondered, an uneasy weight settling in her stomach. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of her friends. She watched as Janice and Lisa approached the table, their faces tense. Diana braced herself, knowing this wouldn't be a pleasant conversation. Lisa sat down and fixed Diana with a fierce stare. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded. Have you lost your mind? You're seriously going to cheat on your husband with some loser from work? What's wrong with you? Are you going through menopause or something? Or did you start taking drugs? Or did you fall and hit your head? Lisa snapped. This is, without a doubt, the dumbest thing I've ever heard anyone say. And I used to think you were one of the smartest people I knew. If you go through with this, you'll officially be the biggest fool I've ever met. Diana forced a small smile and replied, Well, good evening to you too, Lisa. Yes, I'm doing fine. And how are you? Lisa just stared, disbelief and anger written all over her face. Diana could see the frustration simmering behind her friend's sharp glare. Diana turned to Janice. Your turn. Janice shook her head slowly. You already know how I feel about this little adventure of yours. I'd say more, but I don't think I can be as polite as Lisa. Diana's sad smile barely wavered. You think you could curse better than Lisa? Janice's expression stayed serious. No one can outswear Lisa, that's for sure. But she left out some key terms, like fool, cheater, adulterer, idiot, and maybe the worst one, disappointment. Diana's smile faltered as Janice leaned forward. But there's one thing I need to say. I think you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life. But I love you, and no matter what you do, we'll still be here to help you pick up the pieces. Lisa sighed and shook her head, muttering, Damn, damn, damn. What you're planning to do is so wrong. And so incredibly stupid. But yeah, I'll be here for you too. Just know that when this all goes south, I'm gonna say I told you so. A lot. Diana hugged them both tightly. Thank you for your love. I know you can't support what I'm doing, but it's everything to know I can count on you afterward. She stepped back, her voice steady. You both know I never do things halfway. I've made a commitment. And now I need to see it through to its natural conclusion. Lisa's voice softened. Diana, there's nothing natural about cheating. And committing to infidelity? That's the opposite of what commitment really means. Diana sat quietly for a moment, their words hanging in the air. Then she stood up and took a deep breath. I need to finish getting ready for tomorrow. I'll bring a bottle of wine. Stay and have a drink for me. Okay? She left the bar and completed the last of her errands before heading home. The house was dark as she pulled into the driveway. She took a moment to collect her thoughts before grabbing her phone and sending Janice a long text message. She knew Janice was furious with her, but she also knew that her friend, in her own way, would still be there if things fell apart. Opening the trunk, Diana hesitated. She couldn't leave the clothes and bags in the car overnight. The morning chill would make them too cold to wear. She carefully carried them inside and tucked them away in the downstairs hallway closet. With that task done, she slipped into bed next to John and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come. Her mind churned with thoughts of what was to come. By 3 a.m., she gave up and got out of bed. She wandered downstairs, drawn to the wedding album still sitting on the coffee table. She stared at it for a moment before flipping it open. The first 2 pages brought back memories so vivid they hurt. She closed the album and pressed her hands to her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. He has to understand, she thought desperately. By 5 a.m., she accepted that sleep wasn't going to happen. She headed to the bathroom for a shower. Afterward, she slipped into a delicate set of lingerie from Victoria's Secret and opened the garment bag hanging nearby. She carefully put on the beautiful outfit she'd chosen for the day. She retrieved the suitcase she'd packed earlier and carried it to the car, placing the Victoria's Secret bag beside it. Before leaving, she wrote a short note to John and left it by the coffee maker. She smirked bitterly at the irony. It felt like she was leaving him a literal Dear John letter. She turned off the lights, walked out to the car, and shut the door behind her with a resolute click. John woke up and glanced at the clock. 6:15 a.m. When he reached out, his hand met an empty space where Diana should have been. His stomach sank as the horrible realization hit him. She hadn't waited until the evening. She'd already left. A vivid, painful image filled his mind. Diana lying in David Summers' bed. The thought pierced through him, sharp and unforgiving. For the first time, doubt crept into his heart. Should I have just let her have that one night? He wondered. Would that have saved us? She had promised to come back to him after this, to belong only to him again. But another thought rose, cold and final. If she's gone to him, I'll never be able to love her again. John stared at the ceiling, memories swirling in his mind. For 22 years, they had built their life together with mutual respect and loyalty. Diana had always expected his unwavering devotion, and he had expected the same from her. They had endured so much together, but this was different. He sat up, hope flickering weakly in his chest. Maybe she was still in the house. Maybe she was sleeping in one of the other bedrooms. John checked every bedroom, but each one was empty. There was no sign that she had come back. When he walked into the kitchen, his heart sank as his eyes fell on a note sitting on the coffee maker. He picked it up, unfolded it, and read the simple message. Please understand. That was all she had written. John collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of it all pressing down on him. The tears he had fought so hard to hold back finally spilled over. He had feared this exact moment, but some part of him had still believed she wouldn't go through with it, that she would stay, forget this insane plan, and remain his wife. After sitting in silence for several long minutes, John forced himself to move. He made a pot of coffee, took a deep breath, and went upstairs. After a quick shower, he dressed and stuffed a duffel bag with clothes before heading back down. He filled his thermos with coffee and walked to the front door. Standing in the entryway, he took one last long look around the house, their home. With a heavy heart, he turned off the lights and closed the door behind him. The cold morning air hit his face as he stepped outside, sharp and bracing. He hadn't started the car, but he thought maybe the cold would snap him out of the numbness he felt. As he walked toward the driveway, he heard a faint hum. The engine was already running. Confused, he opened the back door to place his bag inside. That's when he saw it. A suitcase and a Victoria's Secret bag sitting on the back seat. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he looked toward the passenger seat and saw Diana, curled up and asleep. For a moment he froze, not daring to believe what he was seeing. He quietly closed the back door and reached for the driver's side handle. Tears of relief and joy blurred his vision. She's here. She came back. He took a deep breath to steady himself and opened the car door. The soft click woke Diana. She stirred and blinked up at him, her eyes sleepy but calm. "Good morning," she whispered, rubbing her eyes. "Good morning," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. After a brief pause, he asked, "How long have you been here?" Diana glanced at the clock. "About 2 hours. Couldn't sleep. And then I started worrying you'd leave without me. So I decided to wait here. I filled up the tank and got us a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts for the drive." John opened the box and raised an eyebrow. "A dozen, huh? There are only 7 donuts in here." Diana, now fully awake, smirked. "A dozen was for both of us. I've already had my share." John laughed, a real laugh for the first time in days, and grabbed a donut, savoring the sweet, warm flavor as it melted in his mouth. "This should hold me over until breakfast at Virginia's diner. How about their country ham and biscuits with gravy?" Diana shook her head playfully. "I'm not exactly dressed for Virginia's diner." John frowned in confusion. "Diana, Virginia's diner doesn't have a dress code. You could show up in pajamas, and they'd still serve you." Diana's eyes twinkled mischievously as she slowly opened her coat to reveal a stunning purple lingerie set. "Well," John murmured, his lips twitching into a grin. "That's almost nothing." "Exactly," Diana replied, her voice soft and warm. "Isn't the coat nice? I traded the dress for it. And if you didn't already check the Victoria's Secret bag, I returned the other lingerie and bought these just for you." She reached out and gently placed her hand under his chin, lifting his face so their eyes met. "This outfit and the body underneath it is for your eyes only. For all the days and nights of our lives." John felt his heart swell. After a brief pause, Diana continued, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm so sorry for the hell I've put you through these past few months. You were right about almost everything. But there are 2 things you were wrong about. Last night I dressed for you, and you alone. I really did meet with Janice and Lisa. She took a deep breath before continuing. And when we made love, I wasn't thinking about David. Not once. He never entered our bedroom. I closed my eyes because I couldn't bear to look at you. Not because I was thinking of him, but because I was ashamed. Ashamed of what I was planning to do. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, I'm ashamed that even that shame didn't stop me from making those plans. John stared at her, his heart in his throat. Diana reached for his hand. Now, I truly understand. John didn't hesitate. He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss filled with every ounce of love, pain, and hope that had been building inside him. They had a long road ahead, and the wounds between them would take time to heal. But as they sat there in that quiet, fragile moment, his heart leaped with joy. She was here. She was staying. As they pulled out of the driveway and drove past Virginia's diner, John glanced over at Diana. She had fallen quiet again, but there was a peacefulness in her posture that hadn't been there before. Diana had fallen asleep again shortly after they hit the highway. John glanced at her peaceful face as memories from Friday played in his mind. They had a lot to discuss, and he knew that if they were going to rebuild their marriage, honesty had to be a two-way street. That meant he needed to share something he had kept buried for years, his own mistake. His thoughts drifted to that evening 7 years ago, a night that still haunted him. He had been in San Francisco for a quarterly corporate meeting. At the time, he was the department head, and his latest venture had catapulted his career forward. Foreign companies were steadily buying out American competitors, but John had spotted a different kind of opportunity. An Italian company renowned for its exceptional engineers, but teetering on the edge of financial ruin. He had pushed hard for the acquisition, despite the risks. His mentor, the CEO, had trusted his judgment and approved the deal. It had turned out to be a brilliant success. The acquisition brought them a team of highly skilled engineers and gave the company a foothold in the European market, along with valuable connections in China. The deal had generated billions and became the crowning achievement of the CEO's career, while securing John's place on the fast track to corporate success. While John was in San Francisco celebrating, Diana was back home in Virginia. She was attending their son's school orchestra concert. The house had been filled with the kind of warmth and music he loved, but he hadn't been there to enjoy it. Instead, he had been toasting his success with his co-workers. Among them was Debbie Maris, a strikingly beautiful marketing rep from another division. He and Debbie had always shared a friendly rapport that bordered on playful flirting. That night, the celebration and drinks had lowered his inhibitions just enough to blur the line between harmless and dangerous. They had danced too closely, closer than any married man should with someone other than his wife. Debbie had leaned into him, her body pressing against his leg, her movements unmistakably suggestive. She slid her panties into his open palm, a silent invitation that made his heart race. They stepped into the elevator together, a current of tension between them. Their lips met, hungry and reckless. His hands roamed over her, and she responded eagerly, dropping her blouse to the floor as the elevator doors opened. By the time they reached her room, Debbie stood in the doorway, completely bare, reaching out for his hand as if daring him to take the next step. But John couldn't move. His feet felt like lead rooted to the spot. A cold, sobering realization swept over him. He couldn't cross that threshold. His desire vanished in an instant, replaced by a wave of guilt so overwhelming it left him breathless. For the first time in hours, his mind was filled with thoughts of Diana, her laughter, her kindness, the life they had built together. He thought of their boys, their home, and the countless memories they had shared. Suddenly, standing there with Debbie, he couldn't find a single reason to walk into that room. John took 2 steps back, then turned and ran, literally sprinted back to the elevator. His heart pounded as he frantically pressed the button for his floor. When he reached his room, he went straight to the shower, desperate to wash away the scent of Debbie's perfume and the shame that clung to his skin. The clock read 1 a.m. as the water poured over him. The night could have ended in disaster, but somehow it hadn't. Yet, the memory lingered like a scar, a constant reminder of how close he had come to betraying everything he held dear. Back in Richmond, at their family home, John had called Diana that night. He needed to hear her voice, to remind himself of what truly mattered. After a few rings, she answered, her voice soft and sleepy. John. Hearing her say his name sent a wave of relief through him. He assured her he was fine, that nothing bad had happened. Then, through a mix of exhaustion and emotion, he shared the incredible news. He told her about the success of his venture, the acquisition's triumph, and the promotion that came with a substantial salary increase. There was a pause, and then Diana's excited voice filled his ear. She told him how proud she was of him, how she'd always known he was destined to succeed. "I love you so much," she said, her voice thick with joy. Tears streamed down John's face as he listened. In that moment, the truth hit him with full force. He had almost shared one of the greatest moments of his life with the wrong woman. Diana's opinion, her love, and her happiness had always been what mattered most. As John drove toward the beach, that memory replayed in his mind. He knew now what he needed to do. He had to tell her everything. He had to explain why he truly understood her feelings, not to excuse her choices, but to help her see that he knew how close someone could come to crossing a line that changed everything. He had been in her place before, and that's why he could look her in the eye and say, "I understand." Once Diana had reconnected with her family emotionally, David Summers no longer held any part of her heart, and, by extension, none of John's concern. David was nothing more than a painful chapter that had closed. But David Summers' story wasn't over yet. He sat alone in Fred Davis's office at Richards and Sons that Monday morning, confusion written all over his face. Fred was the vice president of human resources, and David had been sent to his office the moment he arrived at work. He couldn't understand why. Sure, he'd missed a couple of deadlines recently. Chasing after Diana had been distracting, but he was confident he could make up for it quickly. This meeting was an unwelcome disruption to his morning, especially since he was desperate to talk to Diana. He needed answers about what had happened over the weekend. Not only had she blindsided him by cutting ties, but she had also sent her two friends, Janice and Lisa, to deliver the final blow. David shuddered as he recalled the scene at the Jefferson Hotel lobby. Lisa had been terrifying. Despite all the years his father had served in the Navy, David had never encountered anyone who could curse with the fury and precision Lisa possessed. She had humiliated him in front of everyone. Even the hotel security had seemed hesitant to intervene. They must have realized that stepping between Lisa and her target would have been a losing battle. As David turned to glance around Fred's office, his eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting on the desk. It was a family portrait. Fred, his three sons, and a smiling woman. David's breath caught in his throat. Lisa, the woman who had verbally destroyed him in public, was Fred Davis's wife. In that instant, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. His stomach sank as he realized why he was really here.